Elvis Presley walked out of Graceland at 11 p.m. on September 4th, 1976, got in his car and drove away. Alone. No security, no Memphis Mafia, no entourage, just Elvis and the open road. For 72 hours, nobody knew where he was. His phone went unanswered. Security searched Memphis. Priscilla panicked. Colonel Parker threatened lawsuits. But Elvis kept driving. 800 miles north, through Tennessee, Kentucky, and into Ohio, following a pole he couldn't explain. And when he finally arrived at the small town of Mount Vernon, Ohio, and knocked on a door he'd only seen in dreams, the woman who answered would help him understand something he'd been running from his entire life. Act 1. The Escape. September 4th, 1976, 11 p.m. Elvis stood in his Graceland bedroom, looking at himself in the mirror. 41 years old, overweight, exhausted. Another Vegas residency scheduled to start in 5 days. Another round of pills to get through it. Another performance pretending to be someone he wasn't anymore. He couldn't do it. Not tonight. Not one more night of being Elvis Presley when he barely remembered who Elvis actually was. Without telling anyone, he grabbed his car keys, walked downstairs, and got into his Lincoln Continental. The guards at the gate looked confused as he rolled down the window. "Going for a drive," Elvis said simply. "Should we follow you, boss?" "No, I need to be alone." He drove north on Highway 51, no destination, no plan, just driving. Away from Graceland, away from Colonel, away from the life that was suffocating him. Hours passed. Tennessee turned into Kentucky. The moon was full, lighting up empty highways. Elvis kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the window frame, feeling the cool night air. For the first time in months, his mind was quiet. Around 3 a.m., he stopped at a rest area, sat on a picnic table under the stars. A truck driver walked past, did a double-take, then kept walking. Either didn't recognize him or respected his privacy. Elvis was grateful either way. He thought about his mother. Gladys had died 18 years ago, but he still felt her absence every day. She would have known what to do, would have told him to be brave, to make hard choices, to stop letting fear control him. That's when he remembered the letter. 3 months ago, a woman named Margaret Sullivan had written to him. Not a fan letter, something different. She'd said she was a spiritual counselor who worked with people in crisis, said she'd had a vision of Elvis, lost and searching, offered to help if he ever needed it, given her address in Mount Vernon, Ohio. Elvis had dismissed it at the time, another person claiming to have special insight into his life. But now, sitting under the stars at 3 a.m., 800 miles seemed like exactly the right distance to run. He got back in his car and kept driving north. When Elvis arrived in Mount Vernon 36 hours later, exhausted, unshaven, barely recognizable, and knocked on Margaret Sullivan's door, what she said before he even introduced himself would prove she'd been expecting him all along. Elvis pulled into Mount Vernon, Ohio around 5 p.m. on September 6th. He'd driven for 2 days with minimal stops, sleeping in his car at rest areas, eating at diners where nobody looked twice at him. He was wearing sunglasses, a baseball cap, old clothes, just another tired traveler. Margaret Sullivan's address led him to a small house on a quiet street. Nothing special. No signs advertising spiritual services, just a modest home with a garden. Elvis sat in his car for 20 minutes, working up courage. What was he doing here? Driving 800 miles to see a woman he'd never met based on a letter she'd sent months ago? It was crazy. Colonel would say he was having another breakdown. But something pulled him forward. He got out of the car and knocked. The door opened. A woman in her 60s, gray hair, kind eyes, looked at him calmly. Before Elvis could speak, she said, "You're exactly on time. I've been expecting you for 2 days. Come in, Elvis." She said his name naturally. No shock, no fan excitement, just recognition. Elvis followed her inside. The house was simple, comfortable. Books everywhere, candles, crystals, the kind of spiritual atmosphere Elvis had always been drawn to but never fully explored. "Sit," Margaret said, gesturing to a chair. "Would you like tea?" "How did you know I was coming?" Elvis asked. "I saw you 3 days ago in meditation, driving north, running from something or towards something, maybe both." She poured tea from a kettle. "You found my letter." "From 3 months ago. I almost threw it away." "But you didn't. Part of you knew you'd need it eventually." Margaret sat across from him. "Why did you come, Elvis?" "I don't know. I couldn't stay there anymore. Couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep being what everyone expects me to be." "So you ran?" "Yes." "Good. Sometimes running is exactly what we need to do. Not running away, running toward ourselves." Margaret sipped her tea. "How long has it been since you've been alone, really alone?" Elvis thought about it. "Years, maybe never. There's always someone around. Security, friends, staff, people who need things from me, people I'm performing for even when I'm not on stage." "Exhausting." "Yes." "So let's not perform here. For the next few days, you're not Elvis Presley. You're just Elvis, a man who's lost and trying to find his way back. Can you do that?" For the first time in years, Elvis felt tears coming. "I don't know who that is anymore." "Then let's find out together." What Margaret helped Elvis discover over the next 24 hours wasn't about fame or career or Colonel Parker. It was about something deeper, a wound he'd been carrying since the day his twin brother died, and how that loss had shaped every decision he'd ever made. Margaret didn't treat Elvis like a celebrity, didn't ask for autographs or photos, didn't want to talk about his career. Instead, she asked about his childhood, his family, his fears. They sat in her garden that evening, watching the sunset. "Tell me about Jesse," Margaret said quietly. Elvis froze. "What?" "Your twin brother, Jesse Guerin. He died at birth. You've never dealt with that loss, have you?" Nobody talked about Jesse. It was too painful, too personal. But here, 800 miles from home, sitting with a stranger who somehow wasn't a stranger, Elvis found himself speaking. "He died, and I lived. My mama said I was carrying 2 souls, his and mine, that I had to live for both of us, be enough for both of us." That's a heavy burden for a child. "I've always felt guilty, like I took something that should have been his, like I don't deserve what I have because he never got a chance." Margaret nodded. "Survivor's guilt. You've been trying to live 2 lives, be enough for 2 people, work twice as hard, achieve twice as much. But Elvis, one person can't live 2 lives. It's impossible, and it's not what your brother would have wanted." "How do you know what he would have wanted?" "Because I know what love wants. Love wants the beloved to be free, to be happy, to be themselves. Your brother's soul isn't trapped in you, demanding you live for him. His soul is free, and he wants you to be free too." Elvis felt something crack open inside him, all the guilt he'd carried, all the pressure to be enough, to prove he deserved to live. It poured out in tears. Margaret let him cry, didn't try to fix it or comfort it away. The next morning, Margaret gave Elvis a task that seemed simple but would force him to confront the person he'd become and decide if that's who he wanted to remain. Margaret woke Elvis early. We're going somewhere. Bring nothing, just yourself." She drove him to a small community center in town. Inside, a group of people were gathering for what looked like an AA meeting, but the sign said, "Personal Freedom Workshop." "What is this?" Elvis whispered. "A group of people working on being themselves instead of who they think they should be. Sit, listen. You don't have to share, unless you want to." Elvis sat in the back, cap pulled low. The group was diverse, young, old, different backgrounds. One by one, people shared their stories. A woman who'd spent 30 years being the perfect wife and mother and forgot who she was. A man who'd built a successful business but hated every minute. A teenager struggling with parents' expectations. Then someone asked, "Is there anyone new who wants to share?" Before he could think, Elvis stood up. "My name is Elvis." He paused. Some people looked up, recognized him, but nobody reacted dramatically. Margaret had probably warned them. "I'm 41 years old, and I don't know who I am anymore. Everyone knows Elvis Presley, the performer, the star, but I don't know Elvis, the person. I've been performing so long, for fans, for my manager, for everyone, that I forgot there's supposed to be someone real underneath." He sat back down, heart pounding. He just admitted weakness in front of strangers, admitted he was lost. But instead of judgment, people nodded, understood. After the meeting, several people came up to him, not for autographs, just to say, "Thank you for sharing. I felt that too." That afternoon, Margaret took him to a lake. They sat on a dock, feet dangling over the water. "You said you don't know who you are," Margaret said, "but I think you do. You're just scared to be him." "What do you mean?" "You're kind, generous, spiritual. You care deeply about people. You want to make beautiful things. Those are real parts of you, but you've buried them under the performance, under Elvis Presley, the brand. The question isn't who you are. It's whether you're brave enough to be that person, even when it disappoints people who want you to be something else." Elvis stared at the water. "What if being myself means losing everything? My career, my income, the people who depend on me? What if being yourself means gaining your soul? Which matters more?" It was the question Elvis had been avoiding his whole life. On the third day, Margaret asked Elvis the hardest question of all. Not about his career or his manager, but about what he would do with his life if nothing was holding him back. His answer would surprise them both. September 8th, Elvis's third morning in Mount Vernon. He'd been gone from Graceland for 72 hours. His phone, which he'd left in the car, probably had hundreds of messages, but he hadn't checked, hadn't wanted to break the spell. Margaret made breakfast. They sat at her kitchen table like old friends. "You need to go back today," she said gently. "People are worried, and you have decisions to make. But before you go, I want to ask you something." "Okay." "If you could do anything, anything at all, with no obligations, no expectations, no fear of failure or judgment, what would you do?" Elvis thought for a long time. "I'd want to sing, but not the same songs, not the same shows. I'd want to make music that means something. Gospel, maybe. Music that helps people feel connected to something bigger." "Why gospel?" "Because that's when I feel most myself, most connected. When I'm singing gospel, I'm not performing, I'm worshiping. I'm part of something larger than Elvis Presley." "So why don't you do that?" "Because Colonel says gospel doesn't sell. Because Vegas wants the hits. Because fans want the Elvis they remember, not the Elvis I want to be." "But those are their wants. What do you want?" Elvis felt tears again. "I want to be free." "Then be free. Stop asking permission. Stop waiting for the right moment. You're 41 years old, Elvis. How much longer will you wait?" They sat in silence. Then Margaret pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. "Write down 3 things you're going to do differently when you go back. 3 changes that honor who you really are. Not big, not dramatic, just real. Elvis took the pen, thought, then wrote. 1. Record a gospel album. My choice, my songs. 2. Tell Colonel I'm taking 6 months off after the next tour. 3. Talk to Lisa Marie honestly, not as Elvis Presley, as her daddy. Margaret read the list, nodded. Good, real, achievable. Now the question is, will you do it? Or will you get back to Memphis and fall into the old patterns? I don't know, Elvis admitted. Probably depends on how strong I feel when Colonel starts pushing back. Then remember this. Remember how you felt sitting on my porch. Remember the meeting where you shared your truth. Remember that you drove 800 miles because some part of you knew you needed to. That part of you is stronger than you think. When Elvis finally drove back to Memphis, he knew the next 72 hours would determine whether his journey meant anything or if he'd slip back into the old patterns. But what happened when he confronted Colonel would prove he'd brought something back from Mount Vernon after all. Elvis arrived at Graceland at 6 p.m. on September 8th. The gates opened and he saw the chaos he'd left behind. Security everywhere, cars parked at odd angles. Charlie Hodge ran out. "Boss, thank God! We thought something happened to you." "I'm fine, Charlie. Just needed some time alone." "Colonel is in the house. He's furious. Been here for 2 days waiting." Elvis took a deep breath. Here it was, the first test. Good. I need to talk to him anyway. Colonel was in the living room, pacing, cigar in hand. When Elvis walked in, Colonel exploded. "Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what you've put everyone through? We have lawyers, security, police looking for you. The Vegas residency starts in 2 days. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking I needed a break." "A break? You disappeared for 3 days without telling anyone. That's not a break, that's a breakdown. We need to get you to a doctor, get you back on your medications, get you stable for—" "No." Colonel stopped. "What?" "No medications, no Vegas residency, not yet. I'm taking time off." "Elvis, you can't just—" "Yes, I can, and I am. I'm performing the shows I've already committed to. Then I'm taking 6 months off. No negotiations." Colonel's face went red. "You have contracts, obligations. You can't just—" "Decide, watch me," Elvis said, calmly. "And Colonel, I'm recording a gospel album. My choice of songs, my producers. You can handle the business side, but the creative control is mine." "Gospel doesn't sell. We've been through this." "I don't care. This isn't about selling. It's about what I need to do for myself." Colonel stared at him. "What happened to you in the last 3 days?" "I remembered who I was before I became who you wanted me to be." The conversation lasted another hour. Colonel threatened, cajoled, tried every manipulation tactic he'd used for 20 years. But something had shifted. Elvis stood firm, used phrases Margaret had taught him. "That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. My decision is final." Eventually, Colonel left, not happy, but accepting that something had changed.